This is a very brief description of the larger scale project for which Curatr was developed. And I think that's important to say, that the digital platform, which we're very proud of and which is a huge achievement in itself, but it is there in order to do a particular piece of work, and in order to identify persistent residual narratives and attitudes to a cross-section of European migrants. You'll see from Derek's examples already that there's lots of other applications beyond our project. And so that's a particular, I suppose, dimension of our engagement with you this morning, is to encourage other people to use this in order to develop their own research and their own projects, very different to our original area of interest. One of the things which is behind this project is an engagement with a point that, Algie, you had made, that new galaxies have become visible through digitization of the archive, creating ever-expanding corpora. If the digital skies revealed anything, he said, that changes our, or he asked, that changes our knowledge of literature. And following on from that and branching out from that, I suppose our question is, does the new digital universe reveal anything that changes our knowledge of how we imagine ourselves, our communities, our histories, our common cultures? What can it tell us specifically for this project about the ways in which national cultures develop and the role of migration in that development? So I have an agenda, and this is something which we might, as a research community, think about, that the ideal with a digital platform like Curatr is that it is agenda neutral. And yet each of us as researchers coming to it, we have our specific questions, we have our specific theoretical models. So there's a dialogue all the time between the data and the human with very specific interests and a very specific research agenda coming to use that data. The theoretical framework behind the development of this is an acknowledgement that large data sets and computational methods do not simplify anything. I think there was an early stage of digital humanities and cultural analytics where there was an assumption that the analysis of large-scale data sets would simplify many of the questions, particularly in literary history. And I think we are in a very different stage at this point in time. Data generates complex understandings, not yes or no answers to questions. And indeed, I learned very quickly from working with Derek and working from data, or with data analysts, that they don't assume that data analytics is a substitute for interpretation. On the contrary, it's a mode of interpretation. Cultural data of its nature may always resist definitive answers, but the more cultural data we analyse, the better we can map the processes of cultural change, dynamism, and the complexity of that process. And I think culture is never still. It's always moving, and it's always more than one thing. And applying a cultural analytics framework doesn't change that. It requires a different mode of response than stable statistics, for example. One of the overall goals of this project is to demystify computational approaches through providing practical tools which incorporate human readable explanations for results. So in other words, the idea is to have something which you do not need extensive technical training in order to use, where you can find a text or a set of texts or a large corpus depending on your particular research methods and your particular research questions. And I suppose one of the things we are very committed to is to correct misconceptions by having an ongoing dialogue between literary, historical, and computational scholars. So within Curatr itself, this means that you need nuanced searchability. It needs to be reusable, and that's really what today is all about. Not just a resource for one project, but for multiple projects. Flexible to adapt to those other projects' needs so that you can export subcorpora and apply different methodologies yourselves. and also an iterative and responsive process. And this is that agenda in action through workshops and getting feedback as well.